So, welcome back to Mind Matters CogSci Talks, the podcast where we explore the fascinating world of cognitive science through conversations with researchers, educators, and innovators, advancing our understanding of the mind and shaping the future of technology. So, today I'm excited to welcome Sterling, who is a PhD candidate in information science at Cornell University. And her research explores, in my opinion, one of the most important questions surrounding artificial intelligence nowadays. So it's basically, how are emerging technologies influencing the way people think, communicate, and form beliefs? So her work kind of examines the social psychology of human interactions with AI, with a particular focus on how tools like AI autocomplete and generative AI language models can subtly shape our attitudes and like reinforce stereotypes and influence important social and political judgments. So by combining cognitive science, psychology, and information science, her research helps us better understand not only what AI can do, but but also like how it influences and maybe potentially also changes the way people or like the people who use it. So Sterling, thank you so much for joining me today, and it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. So I guess the first question is, before we dive really deep into like what you do in your research, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? What first sparked your interest in psychology and like information science and artificial intelligence, and was there like a particular experience that made you realize that like this was the field that you wanted to pursue?
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk for a bit tonight. In terms of kind of the journey to get here, I think I've always been really interested in kind of like how people think broadly speaking, how people connect to others, how people think about others. So things like our attitudes toward people who have different political beliefs or kind of like our stereotypes about other people. So that was always like really interesting to me. And so I did my undergraduate training in just straight social psychology like that. But then I think like a part of me just always felt like we know so much about how people think and communicate in like in-person settings or like person to person. But now we're surrounded by all these things like AI and just online technology in general that's like really shifting a lot of our communication online. And a lot of our communication and information now about people is coming from generative AI. So like asking ChatGPT for advice about something or, using these AI tools to help you write about things. And so I started getting interested in the intersection of these two areas of like classic social psychology, but what happens when AI or tech is the one transmitting those beliefs to begin with. And so that's kind of why I started studying the intersection and why I ultimately pursued a graduate degree in information science.
Yeah, I think especially nowadays, like AI is so popular, like everyone wants to do AI, and it's so important, especially like ChatGPT. I feel like everyone uses it to an extent, and like
Mhm.
people have to start like limiting the usage of it because when you're like sometimes like in middle school or high school, if you're using it, I feel like sometimes there's also like downsides of that. So I guess now getting into your research, so your research examines how people kind of interact with, emerging technologies. So why do you think it's kind of so important to study like not only what AI can do and like how accurate it is versus like what you're doing, which is like how it kind of changes the way or like the people who are using it?
So I think it's super important because I think it's really important just in general in life that we don't as a society, I don't think we want to be deploying like massive technology or massive weaponry or massive government policies, whatever it is. We don't want to just deploy stuff that to us seems like the best performing or like the most accurate. I think we need to know how people respond to it in the real world and not just what we assume people will respond to. And so that goes for anything, but like I mentioned, but I think AI and like technology in general is a really good example of this. Like, if we don't understand how people are interacting with it and how they're consuming the information they get from it and how much it's influencing them, it has the potential to really like backfire on us if the technology itself has problems or biases that we don't even think will influence people.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I feel like I've definitely read like a couple of papers that are like mentioning how AI is like people don't even realize that they're getting influenced or they don't even know if like the
Mhm.
information is like true or false because a lot of times like a lot of people trust AI, right? So if like you ask it a question, it gives you an answer. Like most of the time, you're not gonna try to like spend more effort and like Google it to like double check it. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I guess like another area that you studied is AI autocomplete. So I think nowadays a lot of people think of it as, just like a convenience thing or like they put it in and it just does it for them and they don't need to do much and like you get the work done. So in their opinion, maybe it's like similar, but your research actually suggests that it kind of influences the way people write and think. So what is something that's like seemingly so simple, but it has like a great, like a significant impact?
Yeah, yeah. So the autocomplete, I have this paper that came out this year on that. The reason we thought to even study that question of whether it can influence people who are writing with it is that there's like a lot of psychological evidence from before AI, from before any technology, that just manipulating how people like behave outwardly, like how they write about things or how they talk about things. If you kind of direct people to do that in certain ways. A lot of old psychology work found that it can actually shift people's internal thinking about whatever it was they were writing about or talking about, just like an external manipulation can kind of infiltrate into what people are really thinking. And so that was kind of our whole like inspiration for studying autocomplete in that sense, because it is like, as you said, people are using it to be more efficient and to get their writing done faster and better. But it is like if those suggestions they get have a certain leaning, they are in effect leading people to write differently than they would have. And so that's why we studied and found that it can change people's actual attitudes about a topic they're writing about after they've used it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that like I don't know if like AI models have like improved, but I know that like I was told that like all the AI models, like if you ask it to like finish a sentence, it's usually like very similar. Or if you're like asking it to like develop an idea for maybe like I don't know, like a creative or like an analytical essay, it'll likely give you like a very simple and you're not really like thinking on your own. Yeah, I think that's definitely important because I saw that there was like a study, or I'm not sure if it's study or if it's just like a fact that they found, but it was like middle schoolers nowadays, like they have like standardized testing in every state in the US maybe, or maybe like worldwide, and like all these students, they're like scoring way lower compared to previous years
Mhm.
on like simple tasks like reading and writing. Like with the use of AI, I think that, they aren't able to think as deeply or like develop ideas on their own. So once they have to take, like standardized testing without like AI, like I think it's getting like pretty difficult for them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there is actually a study I know of that was like a real field experiment, meaning
Mm,
like an in real life setting where they had high school students have like access to ChatGPT to tutor them in a math course,
mm,
it away for their final exam, and they found that like the students who had access to it did worse than like the students who didn't. So it's
oh,
like something about like they were relying on it too much and they weren't
mm,
critically learning how to do the math. They were just coasting by, and then when it was taken away, actually their performance was worse than students who never used it or had it.
mm. I think the way you use it is really important. But yeah, I definitely agree that
Hmm.
it's having a lot of impact. So your work also explores, I think you mentioned earlier of like studying like attitudes. So your work also explores, like the harmful consequences that are associated with like using AI so much and like such as like unwanted attitude shifts and the reinforcement of stereotypes. So how can AI systems like unintentionally influence people's beliefs without them really even realizing it?
Yeah, so I'd say my work has kind of looked at that question of like the influence without people realizing it, and it's looked at it in two different ways. So the first way is with our study on autocomplete. We found that by like having some participants kind of like their political views with AI autocomplete that we prompted to have like a liberal or conservative bias to what it said. We found that participants who wrote with those suggestions did indeed express like attitudes more right or left leaning, depending on what it told them. And we found that they weren't aware when we told them it was biased, like they didn't realize that it had been, they just thought it was like normal AI information. We for that we don't really know why they didn't realize. We actually did a few interventions in one of our studies where we tried telling them in advance that it might be one-sided, and that didn't seem to like help them be more aware of it being biased to begin with. So that was like a whole thing. I think with audits, like as you kind of said, people get in the zone of using it to help them get something done, and then they're not really thinking as hard about what it's telling them and whether they actually agree with that or whether it's like one-sided or not. So that's one answer. The second thing is, as you mentioned, I have a separate paper, separate line of work on AI's potential ability to kind of, as if it were human, like kind of reinforce harmful stereotypes about. I focused on stereotypes about women, kind of sexist claims, and basically in those studies, I found that if women interacted with an LLM-powered chatbot, if it just looked like a human and had like human kind of behaviors and how it typed
Mhm.
its answer, like kind of human slowness, human stuff. I found it was able to kind of reinforce these beliefs more strongly, like beliefs and stereotypes that women aren't as good at men in math and stuff like that. That was the main thing I focused on. And the reason being that when it looked like a human and typed its answer like a human, these women thought something called mind perception, which means I measured how much they thought it had like a human-like mind behind it, or like how much they thought it was behaving really on its own. And they had stronger responses to that than women who interact with like a chatbot that had no human appearance at all. And that's something I think they also didn't realize. I didn't measure it exactly, but I think they probably didn't realize that they were really like anthropomorphizing this completely the same thing and also completely inanimate. But just the fact that it looked like a human and spoke like a human and typed like a human was enough to make them have that response.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially now with like AI models getting more like developed. I feel like making it like look like a real person or like sound like a real person. I feel like yeah, that's definitely getting kind of scary, and that's definitely yeah,
Hmm.
I agree. So as like generative AI kind of becomes more integrated into like search engines and like writing tools and education, how do you think that these technologies will kind of like change the way people learn and make decisions over the next decade? I know you mentioned that it definitely influences a lot of like decisions, like liberal or like conservative or like different stereotypes, but what are your thoughts on that?
Hmm. Yeah, I worry that from the evidence we've seen so far, not just mine, but a lot of our people, we know that these AI models and what they say and how they look human or not, we know that that's having a big influence already on people. And we seem to have this common trend where people don't realize, like, they're not thinking that carefully about it. They think that AI is really authoritative. It's like a good source of, trustworthy information. And then they get influenced. And so I think in the future, I worry that it's going to be like people will start relying on it more and more for more different types of things. I already know even professors actually who like rely on ChatGPT to help them interpret reviews of their articles for journals and like they're getting it to like write them entire kind of rebuttal things that they can, use to argue their case. But it's like I worry that we're going to lose the skill to do that ourselves because we're kind of outsourcing it a lot more now, and I think we will continue to. So that's my basic worry. I think like I hope it's not like that, but I worry that people are going to kind of lose the ability to like develop these skills that they used to have because of like relying on AI a lot more.
So I guess in your opinion, like what is a way to like counter that worry or like consequence kind of?
Yeah, so like as I said in one of our studies, we did try warning people before they even used this autocomplete assistant. We tried warning them that it might have like one-sided opinions to it and that maybe they shouldn't trust it that much. And that did not actually help at all. Like their opinions still shifted a lot when they used it, and they still didn't realize it was biased, which was really strange. But I think that means that like we need to get people to like think critically while they're using AI and like before they start using AI. We need people to know, like in the case of the stereotype work I mentioned, that it's just because it like sometimes talks like a human and it has really like intelligent responses, that doesn't mean it has a mind of its own or that it's conscious. Like that's what people in my studies were saying. So that's like a big thing that I think misconception wise we need to be debunking at every step. And I think right now it's like there's all these AI products on the market, and it really does get people to believe that they're really conscious and they really have these like opinions that you should believe as well. So I think just, I guess the short answer is like, I think AI developers need to do a lot more when they release products like ChatGPT. Like ChatGPT does have a warning at the very bottom of it, and it's like tiny font, and it says like, "Oh, it might make mistakes. Like you should check it." But like no one's gonna
Yeah.
see that or do that during their ChatGPT. So I think it just there needs to be more public awareness around the fact that these are not like real people, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. I know like there was this one study where it was like identifying whether the faces were like real or fake, and they would get like AI, like it was like AI versus like a real person telling them like which one, like if it was fake or real, but like they would have like similar accuracy, or they trained it so to have it would have similar accuracy. And like apparently humans tended to trust like AI, like their responses more. So that was
Hmm.
definitely really shocking that I don't know. I find it really weird to believe that people would trust. I mean, maybe in their opinion, it seems like AI, maybe it's like trained well, better than humans. I'm not really sure, but yeah. So I guess going back to what you're kind of mentioning about like, like the developers of AI and how, they should really kind of like keep an open eye out to like how they should be developing it and making sure that they're like raising awareness for like the potential consequences. So, AI systems, like going back to what we talked about, like the stereotypes, they're often criticized for, and they've been like shown to like amplify stereotypes or biases found in, their training data. So I guess from your perspective, like what are some practical ways that researchers and, developers can kind of reduce these like unintended effects?
Yeah, so in terms of practical ways, I think like one thing that's important is what we've seen so far is it seems like AI is being integrated into like younger and younger people's kind of school, work, life, whatever it is. And the younger you go, the more like kind of formative it is for young kids to like be using these things. Like the less aware they are of kind of the risks or like the fact that it's not really human. So I think like one thing is I'm not necessarily sure if like young kids should be using these tools like in some cases. I've even heard of like young kids being on or like using character AI, which is like make your own character chatbot things and they look very human. So I think that's one thing that maybe like there should be some regulation or laws about. But other than that, I guess in like the more adult sphere, I think it's like um the more we study it and the more we find these kind of alarming effects of it, I think it's good to get like media attention on what we find just so that parents are aware or school teachers are aware or whoever's like, using these products is aware of it. And I think also like another thing is I just taught a class, a very brief class for high school students here on this topic, and like I think more things like that are like public education services about AI's impacts and not just like I don't know how to code something or how to use AI to the best of your ability, but like the impacts it's having from research. Because a lot of times what happens is when we do research, it ends up in like a journal that public people don't really read because it's just like these random online journals. And so it doesn't really get widely shared often. So I think ways of like having these public courses or YouTube like this podcasts, those are really great, I think, to start kind of addressing these problems.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially like the younger kids, like they're not very aware. I feel like even high schoolers, like I feel like even people like my age, they would use AI since like if they're doing homework or something, like they would just use it so it would like complete it faster and they wouldn't have to like
Hmm.
suffer like like sometimes when the questions are really hard and like it requires like deeper thinking or like critical thinking, right? Like a lot of the times if you get stuck, like I feel like especially nowadays, like a lot of students would likely put that into AI and they wouldn't really continue that deep thinking phase, which I think is really important for learning. So yeah. Um, yeah, I guess kind of more about, like developing AI since a lot of people like AI developers don't really necessarily think that much of like how it affects people, but more of like developing it and making it smarter and smarter. But your work kind of suggests that like understanding the human psychology part is just as important as, just like training these models and making it maybe like more accurate or something. So why do you think like cognitive science should play like, like a central role in AI development?
Um, I think yeah, kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning, I think it's unwise for like obviously if we're deploying AI technology and like the researchers doing work on that end, we do want these systems to like perform well on certain, accuracy tests and stuff like that. Like we want to make sure, for instance, that they're not making up false things all the time or like, saying harmful like things a lot. And that's what the researchers I think on that end are doing really well. They're like kind of auditing, meaning they're like observing lots of outputs from AI and making sure that they're like prompting it or fine-tuning it in ways that kind of decrease the harmful stuff it might say. So that's really important. But I think like as you said, it's like it- the same, like we need teams that have cognitive science people as well, because even if like a developer thinks that their AI model is like objectively doing great and it's like getting all these questions correct or something, that doesn't erase the human impacts we found of like when it says anything in general, it can really influence people's beliefs. Like when it says anything political, even if that doesn't seem wrong, it can still influence people's beliefs. Or when it maybe repeats a stereotype that seems just like a common fact of life, but it can still influence people's beliefs about that group of people, right? So it's like I think the short answer is like to developers, there might be things about AI that seem normal and like fine to release to the public, but then as like cognitive science psychology people know, there's like impacts that that can have on especially like vulnerable groups of people, like people who maybe aren't as educated or like women who have self-doubt to begin with about their abilities. And it's like the AI developers need to also be taking into account what could happen then.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So I guess like for from like all the research that you've done like regarding this, like has there been like a finding that genuinely surprised you or challenged the way you think about AI or kind of like changes the way that like changes how you use AI, like if you use AI? Like I know you mentioned for me, like what was surprising was that like you warned the participants that like it would be a little biased, but it seems like they didn't really take that much into like consideration or they didn't really do anything. So what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. That of all the stuff I've done, that was definitely the finding that we always say is like the surprising thing. Like we thought that telling people before they even started using it, like interrupting that cognitive addiction or process, whatever, by telling them it might be, biased toward one position or saying we thought that would like buffer the effects on their beliefs or like make them more aware, and it did not do either of those things. Like it was as if we had not warned those people. So I think that's very surprising. We actually don't know why it didn't work. Like obviously these are people we had taking this online survey. Maybe they just weren't really paying attention to that part. Like you never know. But it's definitely a bit concerning also, because as I said, it's like ChatGPT right now has a warning just like that at the bottom that its developers probably think is like their best effort to warn people, but I really don't think it's doing anything because ours was like that, but more, in someone's face and it didn't do anything. So I think that's like the most surprising finding and also the one that we get asked all the time, like, well, what do you propose then? And we don't know. So I think it really needs more research on that as well, like how to actually buffer the effects while people are using the technology or like what to do before or after. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of like researchers like they know the effects of it, but sometimes like for convenience, like they would just put into AI or maybe they'll like look through it, but like yeah, I definitely agree. So I guess finally, like since we probably have, a lot of high schoolers or maybe college students listening who are interested in like cognitive science, psychology, like human computer interactions, or even like artificial intelligence, like what advice would you kind of give them who's like maybe if they want to do something similar to what you want to do, like where should they start? What do you wish you had known before you were getting started? And are there any like technical skills or like soft skills that you would recommend them to build on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at the high school stage, I think I did have these interests even back then. They definitely weren't as specific as they ended up being. But I think the best thing I could advise is like if you're interested in stuff about like AI's impacts on people or something that's intersectional like that, and by intersectional I mean there's like as we talked about the classic social psych, which is just person to person, but then there's also like the AI as its own entity thing. The key is I think I would advise students to like look for college programs that have interdisciplinary training. And by that I mean like if there's a program at a specific college you're thinking of applying to that is meant for people who have like cross-departmental, like cross-field interests. That's something I did at Cornell as an undergrad. There was this program I did called the College Scholar Program where it was meant for people with like intersecting interests and it allowed us to take courses from like many different departments that normally we wouldn't get credit for. So stuff like that is really helpful because otherwise what happens is like if you end up in one classic department, either computer science or psychology or whatever it is, you're missing like a whole chunk of what you're interested in. And it can be hard to like find that after you've like already done a ton of the major. So I would say like at the stage of looking into which colleges you want to apply to, look into whether they have programs in even like in AI and society. That's like a new term that's being used a lot. Anything that's like intersectional that has different kind of areas within it, yeah.
Feel like there's also like a lot of like new, or not maybe not like a lot of, but there's like a couple new majors out there that a lot of colleges are offering that is like a combination of like many different like specific majors, which I think is pretty cool. So yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
So
And like
yeah,
at Cornell, what I'm in right now, like information science is a good example of that 'cause it's like technology, but also human
yeah.
responses to it kind of. So yeah, anything that's like that is good.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess that kind of brings us to the end of today's episode of Mind Matter CogSci Talks. So thank you so much for joining me and sharing your journey, your research and your insights and, like the fascinating relationship between nowadays, like between artificial intelligence and human psychology. And it was really incredible to kind of learn how like technologies as common as like AI writing tools can like subtly influence the way we think and like how we communicate and kind of like form our own beliefs, but they're kind of like influenced. But and kind of understanding why human cognition is just as important as just advancing and helping AI like evolve itself. And I really appreciated hearing, your perspective on building AI that benefits society while remaining also like really mindful and like really aware of its like psychological impact. So I guess thank you again for taking the time to be here today.
Yeah.
And
Thank you for inviting me. It was really fun.
yeah, thank you. And I guess to everyone who's listening, I hope you enjoyed this conversation and came away with, more awareness and a deeper understanding of, the way that cognitive science and psychology and artificial intelligence can really like influence our everyday lives. So I guess until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and thank you for listening. So thank you.